I've collected 170 unusual historical photos that you might have missed. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? In 1995, Iowa news anchor Jody Huisentruit told a coworker she was heading to work, but vanished before arriving. Police found her belongings scattered beside her car, including a red high heel and a bent key. Yet no trace of Jody has ever been found. Charlie Chaplin talks with young Jackie Coogan during the filming of The Kid in Los Angeles in 1920. Released in 1921, it was Chaplin's first feature-length film as a director and made Coogan one of cinema's first child stars. Survivors walk through shattered Nagasaki on August 10, 1945, one day after the atomic bombing. The blast killed tens of thousands instantly, while burns and radiation claimed many more lives in the following weeks. At age 10, Annie Oakley was forced into brutal child labor, but by 15, her hunting skills had helped pay off her mother's mortgage. She later offered to lead a regiment of female sharpshooters in 2 wars, and after her death, her grieving husband stopped eating and died 18 days later. In 1944, New Guinea campaign veteran Captain Saburo Shimada trained in kendo despite having a prosthetic hand. He secured the sword above his head and continued practicing a martial art that demands precise control of both hands. In 1920, 6-year-old Nancy Bentley was bitten by a snake near an Australian naval base. Because civilians could not receive treatment aboard naval ships, officers officially enlisted her as a mascot, so a Navy doctor could save her life. In the early 1900s, circus strongwoman Sandwina stunned crowds by lifting her husband, Max Heyman, above her head with one arm. After Sandwina died in 1952, Max gave an interview recalling the astonishing strength that made his wife a Barnum and Bailey legend. A United States Army soldier stands beside hundreds of captured Zastava M48 rifles after the invasion of Iraq in 2003. These Yugoslav-made weapons once armed Saddam Hussein's forces, but the entire stockpile was marked for destruction. This iceberg was photographed on April 15, 1912, and was later suspected of sinking the Titanic. A red streak near its base looked like ship paint, but the photographer had no idea the disaster had happened hours earlier. These mugshots show Italian anarchists Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti after their arrest in Massachusetts in 1920. Their controversial trial sparked worldwide protests, but both men were executed in the electric chair 7 years later. In February 1941, a Jewish boy played violin in the Warsaw Ghetto to survive. Behind its sealed walls, the Nazis trapped more than 400,000 people, where hunger and disease killed thousands each month. Photographed in 1902, Dorset Street in East London was feared as the worst street in London. 16 years earlier, Jack the Ripper murdered Mary Jane Kelly in a tiny room just off this street, making it one of the darkest addresses in British history. Muqtada al-Sadr's Mahdi army takes control of the streets in Sadr City during its 2004 uprising against American forces and Iraq's interim government. The militia's second major rebellion began in August and triggered fierce battles across Baghdad and southern Iraq. 18-year-old Marine George Johnson rushed a Japanese cave on Tulagi in August 1942, throwing grenades until enemy fire killed him and his squad could advance. Awarded the Silver Star after his death, his unidentified remains were never recovered, and a United States warship later carried his name. Smoke from burning buildings covered Los Angeles on April 30, 1992, during riots sparked by the acquittal of 4 officers charged in the beating of Rodney King. The unrest lasted 6 days, killed 63 people, and caused more than $1 billion in damage. In 1925, this New York classroom had no heat because fresh, cold air was believed to help prevent tuberculosis. Children attended lessons wrapped in thick blankets, turning an ordinary school day into a freezing public health experiment. In 1923, Mrs. B.G. Miller displayed these racist signs as the Hollywood Protective Association tried to drive Japanese Americans away. The campaign began after Japanese Americans bought a nearby property to build a Presbyterian church. This chilling photo shows an overcrowded homeless shelter in Berlin in 1920, with men packed onto narrow beds after the First World War. Germany's housing crisis, mass unemployment, and soaring prices forced thousands into shelters like this. This chilling photograph captures a Ku Klux Klan initiation ceremony in 1925. The white robes hid members' identities as they joined a secret organization built on racist violence and fear. In January 1925, Adolf Hitler sat at his desk just weeks after leaving prison for his failed coup. 1 month later, Bavaria lifted its ban on the Nazi Party, allowing him to rebuild the movement that would seize Germany. Just 1 month earlier, Hitler was held in this surprisingly comfortable cell at Landsberg prison for trying to overthrow Germany's government. He served only 9 months of a 5-year sentence and used his confinement to dictate much of Mein Kampf. These desperately poor women were not searching for food, but digging through a Manchester mine dump for scraps of coal. Every piece could heat their homes or be sold for desperately needed money. During the housing crisis of 1920, evicted families often watched as every possession they owned was piled onto the street. With too few affordable homes available, losing one address could leave an entire family homeless overnight. This crowded ship carried immigrants toward America in the early 20th century, with passengers packed among ropes, cranes, and luggage. Many crossed the Atlantic in cramped conditions, hoping to pass strict inspections and begin a new life. This photo shows a German shop during the hyperinflation crisis of 1923, when a loaf of bread cost 50,000 marks and meat reached over 1 million. Prices rose so fast that workers were sometimes paid twice a day before their money lost more value. In 1925, the Anti-Evolution League sold creationist books outside its headquarters during the Scopes monkey trial in Dayton, Tennessee. Teacher John Scopes was found guilty of teaching human evolution and fined $100, but the verdict was later overturned. In Rome in 1922, fascist militants burned socialist books and newspapers in the street as onlookers gathered around. Such attacks helped silence political opponents shortly before Benito Mussolini seized power after the March on Rome. The sixth cholera pandemic spread across the world from 1899 to 1923, killing more than 800,000 people in India alone. In this rare Tokyo photograph, fishermen's wives receive cholera vaccinations as officials fight a disease that could kill through severe dehydration within hours. During Germany's hyperinflation crisis, Berliners lined up at a soup kitchen as food prices rose faster than wages. By November 1923, one United States dollar was worth about 4 trillion marks, leaving many workers unable to afford a basic meal. This 1926 photograph shows crowds enduring terrible conditions after religious riots in San Luis Potosi, Mexico. Just weeks later, a harsh law restricting Catholic worship helped ignite the Cristero War, one of Mexico's bloodiest conflicts. This is Cork after British forces set fire to the city in December 1920, following an Irish Republican Army ambush. The blaze destroyed City Hall, the public library, and more than 40 businesses, leaving thousands without work. In the 1920s, this anti-dust hood was designed to protect housewives while cleaning. Its cloth mask, goggles, and breathing hole made ordinary dusting look like a terrifying experiment. During the Great Depression, unemployed Americans sold apples on city streets for 5 cents each. For many, this tiny sale was the only barrier between survival and hunger. At first, this looks like an ordinary train carrying passengers through Berlin. In reality, the railway cars had been turned into emergency housing, and the men at the windows were living and sleeping inside them. During the Great Depression, struggling families lined up to buy milk for just 11 cents a quart. Even at that price, many could afford only a small amount. In 1924, Berlin's housing crisis became so severe that homeless families were sheltered inside an opera house, turning its ornate balconies into crowded living quarters. Laundry, trunks, and blankets filled the theater as refugees built temporary homes where audiences once watched performances. During Prohibition, Virginia police searched beneath a sailor's mattress and uncovered an astonishing 191 bottles of illegal liquor. The hidden stash was large enough to turn his bed into a secret bar. This rare photo shows an opium den in New York, where customers lay packed together with long pipes. By the late 19th century, these hidden rooms fueled addiction until police raids and strict drug laws forced them underground. In 1925, about 2,200 American Thread Company workers in Willimantic went on strike after brutal wage cuts. The company evicted strikers from its homes, forcing entire families into this tent camp while they continued their fight. During Prohibition, smugglers tried to carry rum across the Mexican border in specially made vests hidden under their clothes. Border officers exposed this man's unusual outfit, packed with bottles ready for illegal sale in the United States. In February 1963, NASA engineers suspended a test subject sideways at Langley Research Center to study movement in reduced gravity. The simulator supported most of his weight, letting researchers rehearse moon-like walking years before the first lunar landing. In 1961, George Harrison, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and drummer Pete Best played inside Liverpool's tiny cavern club. The Beatles performed there nearly 300 times before fame made such intimate shows impossible. Between 1993 and 1996, Jan Morek photographed Warsaw's Nowy Swiat Street packed with boxy taxis, delivery vans, and shoppers. The image captures Poland's rapid post-communist transformation when Western brands were arriving, but the old city still looked unmistakably Soviet. Harf Zimmermann photographed these young East Berliners in the 1980s, when punk fashion openly challenged state conformity. East German authorities saw such subcultures as a political threat, and the Stasi often watched, questioned, and infiltrated them. Like father, like son, a roadside repair. In 1960s, Poland turns into a lesson beside a classic FSO Serena. While the father works beneath the real car, his children copy him by fixing their overturned pedal car. A French soldier from the 112th Artillery Regiment wears a Tissot gas mask during the First World War. Its sealed goggles and breathing tube protected him from chlorine and phosgene, weapons that could kill within minutes. In 1949, Philippe Halsman photographed Jean Cocteau as a six-armed creative machine for Life magazine. The illusion was not made with long exposure. Hidden assistants placed their arms behind Cocteau while he held a book, cigarette, pen, and scissors. In 1954, a North American F-86 Sabre endured the brutal cold at Goose Bay, Canada. Its crew used this H-1 heater to stop the fuel control from freezing before the jet could even start. British Lions prop Fran Cotton stands caked in mud during the brutal match against the Junior All Blacks in Wellington in 1977. The soaked pitch was so badly churned up that players became almost unrecognizable, creating one of rugby's most famous photographs. Italian air raid wardens pose among the ruins of Parma in 1944, carrying chunks of masonry cleared during rescue work. These men belong to the National Air Raid Protection Union, a militarized force that searched bombed buildings, fought fires, and rescued trapped civilians. On October 15, 1944, German artillery burned in King Aleksandar Street during the Battle for Belgrade. Soviet and Yugoslav forces liberated the city 5 days later, ending more than 3 years of German occupation. This was Pepa Flores's last public appearance before she abruptly vanished from the spotlight in 1986. The Spanish actress and singer left fame behind and moved to Malaga, where she chose a private life far from cameras. British sisters Nancy and Betty Debenham became famous motorcyclists around 1925, when few women dared to race and repair their own machines. Daughters of the Debenhams department store chairman, they also worked as sports journalists and wrote books teaching women how to ride. Working-class Teddy girls pose on a London bomb site in 1955, wearing sharp Edwardian-style jackets as an act of rebellion. Photographer Ken Russell captured this rare glimpse of one of Britain's first female youth subcultures. Gladys West programmed early computers to turn satellite data into a precise model of Earth's irregular shape. Her calculations accounted for gravity, tides, and other distortions, helping create the geodetic foundation that allows global positioning system satellites to pinpoint locations accurately. In 1946, Abby Pudgy Stockton lifted a 135-pound barbell with one hand on Muscle Beach in Santa Monica. Known as the Queen of Muscle Beach, she stood only 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed just 115 pounds. These are most likely Italian Alpini transport troops, identified by their distinctive felt hats, and the truck marked 158th Vehicle Section. Their Carcano model, 1938 rifles were standard short rifles, while the folding bayonet cavalry carbine was mainly issued to mounted units. In April 1942, veteran politician Yukio Ozaki openly campaigned for independent candidate Daikichiro Tagawa during Japan's tightly controlled wartime election. Months later, Ozaki was arrested for lèse-majesty after authorities claimed a poem he wrote insulted Emperor Hirohito. On May 28, 1988, Muscovites tasted American-style pizza from a truck beside Red Square. The Astro Pizza van called itself the first American pizza in Moscow, 2 years before the first Pizza Hut opened in the Soviet capital. Urakami Cathedral stood just 500 meters from the atomic bomb's hypocenter when Nagasaki was destroyed in 1945. This severed head of Christ was found among its ruins, while most people attending Mass inside were killed instantly. Around 1944, Britain imprisoned members of the Irgun and Lehigh underground groups at Gilgil Camp in Kenya. This rare photograph shows detainees working among wooden barracks, thousands of miles from their homes in Palestine. Diane Arbus photographed this formally dressed beachgoer at Coney Island in 1960, wearing a hat, swimming trunks, socks, and polished shoes. His rigid pose and unusual outfit turned an ordinary summer scene into one of Arbus's unsettling studies of people who stood apart. This is Ava Gardner in 1937, 4 years before she signed with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. She later became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, despite arriving at her first screen test with no acting experience. Kabul, Afghanistan, in 1968. One woman wears a full-body burqa, while another walks beside her in Western-style clothes. The photograph captures how sharply different traditions coexisted in the capital decades before war and Taliban rule transformed daily life. A rare magazine recipe from actress Layla Hyams inspired a search for the favorite foods of sideshow performers. Hyams played Venus, the animal trainer, in Todd Browning's controversial 1932 film, Freaks, and each recreated dish will reveal what these unusual stars actually enjoyed eating. Elizabeth Taylor stands with Chris Wilding and Liza Todd in Gstaad in July 1962. Her children had different fathers, while Taylor's secret romance with married actor Richard Burton was becoming a worldwide scandal. Retreating Iraqi forces set more than 600 Kuwaiti oil wells on fire during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The flames burned for months, creating vast smoke clouds and one of history's worst man-made environmental disasters. In 1939, a mother buys meat while her young son waits beside the display case in a Greendale, Wisconsin grocery store. The signs reveal striking Depression-era prices. Beef and pork cost 19 cents per pound, while Spam was reduced to 25 cents. Apollo 13 astronauts await rescue in the Pacific Ocean on April 17, 1970, after an oxygen tank explosion nearly killed them in space. All 3 survived and splashed down safely just 4 miles from the recovery ship. In 1965, a 140-kiloton underground nuclear blast at Semipalatinsk hurled 10 million tons of earth into the sky. It left a crater roughly 400 meters wide, which was later flooded to create the radioactive Lake Chegan. Jacob Silverman smiles during his murder trial after one juror blocked a first-degree murder conviction, leading to a lesser manslaughter verdict. Fueled by public outrage and anti-Semitic rhetoric, Oregon voters changed the state constitution in 1934 to allow 10-2 jury verdicts. Erno Vadas photographed workers walking toward a Budapest factory in 1955, their long shadows cutting across the empty fields. The image captures Hungary's rapid post-war industrial growth, when huge factories rose beside roads that were still little more than dirt paths. The Great Chicago Fire began on October 8, 1871, and burned for 2 days. It killed about 300 people, destroyed thousands of buildings, and left nearly 100,000 residents homeless. An Iraqi soldier lifts an improvised weight inside a trench during the Iran-Iraq War in 1980. Soldiers often spent months in cramped defensive positions, turning scrap metal into exercise equipment to stay strong between attacks. In 1918, a gun crew from the American 23rd Infantry fires a 37mm cannon at entrenched German troops. This small weapon could be carried forward with the infantry and used to destroy machine gun nests at close range. In May 1991, Ethiopian rebel troops rode into Addis Ababa on captured tanks after dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam fled the country. Their victory ended a brutal civil war and brought the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front to power. After eviction in the late 19th century, this Irish family was forced to live in a crude hut built from stone, branches, and earth. Thousands of rural families lost their homes during Ireland's land conflicts, often after failing to pay crushing rents. In 1926, this hotel warned visitors that snoring was forbidden. Anyone addicted to night noises could be transferred to floors 12 through 14 by asking the check clerk. Broke and desperate to get home, Reg Spears mailed himself inside this wooden box. For more than 2 days, he survived with canned food, a flashlight, a blanket, a pillow, and 2 plastic bottles for water and urine. In 1962, American ships dropped signaling depth charges near Soviet submarine B-59, whose crew feared war had begun. Captain Valentin Savitsky wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo, but Senior Officer Vasily Arkhipov refused the required approval, helping prevent a possible nuclear war. On September 20, 1944, mortar fire ripped open this Dutch school as British glider pilots searched the ruins for German snipers. Sergeants J. Howell and J. Terrell entered with rifles raised, knowing a hidden marksman could fire from any shattered room. This rare photo shows Jack Daniel in the white hat beside George Green, the son of Nathan Green. Nathan was the formerly enslaved master distiller who taught Jack Daniel how to make whiskey. This Virginia driver's license was issued in 1939 and remained valid for 3 years. It recorded the driver's weight, height, eye color, hair color, and even banned him from working as a chauffeur. A young woman, described in the original caption as a sex worker, poses with Soviet soldiers during the invasion of Czechoslovakia in August 1968. The smiling scene hides a brutal reality. Warsaw Pact forces had just crushed the Prague Spring reforms. A Soviet wedding party crosses a Siberian logging site, stepping over freshly cut trees in formal clothes. A helicopter waits behind them, showing how remote communities relied on aircraft when roads were scarce. Before electric refrigerators, workers cut huge blocks of ice from frozen rivers and lakes. The blocks were packed in sawdust inside insulated ice houses, where they could stay frozen for months before being sold to homes and businesses. On January 10, 1996, an American tank smashed through a Serb barricade near Dubrav, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. The vehicle belonged to the 16th Engineer Battalion of the Germany-based 130th Engineer Brigade. Britain, 1920. A disarmed Mark IV tank was converted into a tourist bus called Joyrides. Women sat on benches inside, while men rode on the wooden upper deck as it carried visitors along the Essex coast and villagers to a local fair. In 1964, cows grazed beneath a massive ash cloud as Costa Rica's Irazu volcano blasted rock and dust into the sky. The eruption destroyed crops, killed livestock, and covered the capital, San Jose, in volcanic ash. In 1943, American singer Kate Smith wrote "To Hitler from Kate" on a torpedo at a United States Navy submarine base in Connecticut. During the war, her marathon radio broadcasts helped sell more than $600 million in war bonds. In 1941, this Chinese worker carried heavy tin ingots inside a British smelting plant in Malaya. Chinese labor powered much of Malaya's tin industry, which made the colony one of the world's leading tin producers. American Marines inspect the wreck of a Japanese G-4M bomber on Iwo Jima in April 1945. Its remarkable range came at a deadly cost. Weak armor and fuel tanks without proper protection made the aircraft dangerously easy to ignite. On March 4, 1918, Army cook Albert Gitchell reported sick at Camp Funston, Kansas, becoming the first recorded American case of Spanish flu. Within days, hundreds of soldiers were ill, and the pandemic would eventually kill up to 100 million people worldwide. On March 1, 1954, Castle Bravo exploded at Bikini Atoll with a force of 15 megatons, 1,000 times stronger than Hiroshima. The blast was nearly 3 times more powerful than expected and spread radioactive fallout across nearby inhabited islands. Japanese cruiser Kashi sinks in the South China Sea on January 12, 1945, after an American torpedo and 2 bombs strike the ship. The bombs ignite its depth charges, triggering a massive explosion that leaves only 19 survivors. Silent film star Dolores Costello posed for this striking portrait in 1928, the year she married legendary actor John Barrymore. Decades later, their granddaughter Drew Barrymore would continue one of Hollywood's most famous acting dynasties. This 1941 portrait shows Eva Kochever, a Polish-Jewish writer who published one of America's earliest books about lesbian life. After authorities deported her for moral turpitude, she was arrested in France and murdered at Auschwitz in 1943. In 1978, a reporter assigned to write Mary Dufour's obituary uncovered evidence that she was actually Anna Merle Sizer. Her brother rejected the discovery because accepting it meant admitting their family had abandoned her in institutions for the criminally insane for 50 years. This is believed to be the last photo of John Belushi taken at Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman's wedding reception. He died in 1982 at just 33, and his friends Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray led the funeral and delivered a brutally funny eulogy. Fanta was created in Germany in 1940 after the Second World War blocked Coca-Cola syrup imports. This rare photo shows a child beside the huge Steiff polar bear costume used to promote the new drink. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and his longtime deputy Clyde Tolson fished together during the 1930s. The 2 men were nearly inseparable for decades, traveled together, and were later buried just yards apart, fueling lasting questions about their private relationship. Oscar Zeta Acosta was the real-life lawyer and activist who inspired Dr. Gonzo in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. In May 1974, he vanished in Mexico at age 39 and was never found. In 1940, a German air raid left central London shattered around the Old Bailey. Above the ruins, its Lady Justice statue remained standing, holding her sword and scales over the bomb-damaged city. In 1917, members of the Chapman High School Canning Club in Kansas posed behind hundreds of jars they had preserved. Their work helped prevent food waste and taught young women vital skills as America faced wartime food shortages. In 1911, Jacques-Henri Lartigue photographed his brother Zissou floating inside a giant tire at Château du Rouzat. Lartigue's playful images later became a major visual influence on filmmaker Wes Anderson. In 1928, Coco Chanel hunted wild boar near Dieppe with Winston Churchill and his son Randolph. During the Second World War, German intelligence listed her as Agent F 7124, codename Westminster. Neil Young and Dennis Hopper pose on the set of Human Highway, a surreal comedy about nuclear disaster. Young spent years making the film, cast himself as a mechanic alongside Hopper, and finally released it in 1982. This rare photograph shows Guru Gobind Singh's sacred weapons displayed during a Shastar Darshan ceremony at Takht Sri Keshgar Sahib in Punjab. The collection includes swords, spears, a matchlock gun, and other 17th and 18th century weapons preserved as Sikh relics. In late 19th century London, this East End exterminator drew a crowd by claiming his secret treatment killed thousands of bugs every night. His sign promised to destroy beetles, fleas, moths, ants, and other pests, turning a grim trade into a street spectacle. Charles Durning survived brutal combat in Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge, earning 3 Purple Hearts for his wounds. After the war, he became a celebrated actor, winning a Tony Award and receiving 9 Emmy nominations and 2 Oscar nominations. In 1963, an amateur radio operator used this Model 15 teletype machine to turn radio signals into printed messages. The Morse key beside her let the station send its required identification by hand. In 1925, Catherine Slaughterback killed 140 rattlesnakes with 3 bullets and a wooden no-hunting sign while protecting her young son. Nicknamed Rattlesnake Kate, she skinned the snakes and turned their hides into a dress, shoes, and necklace. In 1960, Israeli agents drugged Adolf Eichmann, dressed him as an El Al crew member, and smuggled him out of Argentina. Hidden behind dark goggles, the Nazi organizer was flown to Israel to face trial for his role in murdering millions. Berlin, in 1945, lay shattered after one of the final and bloodiest battles in Europe. Wrecked military vehicles filled the streets as civilians returned to a city where thousands of buildings had been destroyed. In the summer of 1941, 12-year-old Gudrun Himmler visited Dachau concentration camp with her father, Heinrich Himmler. While prisoners suffered behind the fences, she recorded the trip in her diary and described it as a wonderful day. A Soviet KV-2 and T-34 from the 4th Mechanized Corps lie trapped in a drainage ditch near Radokiv, Ukraine, on June 25, 1941. Abandoned during the German invasion, these powerful tanks were defeated by mud before reaching battle. In 1954, the Soviet Union detonated a real atomic bomb during Operation Snowball in the Orenburg region. Around 45,000 soldiers then trained near the blast zone to test how an army could fight after a nuclear attack. In 1948, Rosa Lee Ingram and her teenage sons were sentenced to Georgia's electric chair after killing a white landowner who allegedly attacked her. A nationwide campaign exposed their one-day trial, and their death sentences were later reduced to life in prison. A 60-year-old father stands with his 3 children inside their worn Kentucky home in 1946. Their patched clothes, bare feet, and nearly empty kitchen reveal how deeply rural poverty survived after the war. Palestinians flee Beirut's Karantina district during an attack by Christian Phalangist fighters in 1976. Up to 1,500 Palestinians and Lebanese Muslims were killed when the district was overrun. German troops watch armored vehicles advance through a Caucasus valley during the invasion of the Soviet Union in September 1942. The offensive reached deep into the mountains in search of vital oil fields, but fierce resistance and overstretched supply lines stopped the advance. On August 23, 1945, Jean Moore kissed her fiancé Ralph Neppel after President Harry Truman awarded him the Medal of Honor. Months earlier, Neppel kept firing his machine gun after a German shell severed one leg and shattered the other, stopping the attack. Troops of Japan's independent 15th Engineer Regiment celebrate at Singapore's Empire Dock in February 1942. Their raised rifles mark Britain's largest surrender of the war, when more than 80,000 British and Commonwealth troops became prisoners. A reconnaissance platoon jumps from a UH-1D Huey during Operation Oregon, 3 kilometers west of Duc Pho in Vietnam. The helicopter balances beside the steep ridge, allowing the soldiers to land where no conventional aircraft could reach. This bizarre anti-dust hood was designed to protect a housewife while she cleaned in the 1920s. The cloth covered her entire head, while tiny openings for glasses and breathing made the invention look deeply unsettling. In 1989, Cheeto Shedden rescued a wounded crocodile named Pocho and nursed him back to health. Their unusual friendship lasted more than 20 years, but Cheeto said his first wife left because he spent too much time with Pocho. On May 13, 1985, Philadelphia police dropped a bomb on the MOVE headquarters in a residential neighborhood. The explosion and fire killed 11 people, including 5 children, destroyed 61 homes, and left about 250 residents homeless. At the Battle of Zborov in 1917, Czech and Slovak volunteers broke through heavily defended Austro-Hungarian lines. Despite being badly outnumbered, they captured more than 3,000 soldiers and turned the attack into a powerful symbol of their fight for independence. In 1975, South Vietnamese civilians climbed the walls of the United States Embassy in Saigon, desperate to escape the advancing communist forces. Many were left behind when the final American helicopters departed. John Schrank stands under arrest after shooting Theodore Roosevelt in Milwaukee in 1912. Roosevelt survived because the bullet was slowed by his steel eyeglass case and folded speech, then stunned the crowd by speaking for more than an hour before going to the hospital. Eva Schloss, an Auschwitz survivor, shows the number tattooed on her arm in 1946. Years later, her mother married Anne Frank's father, making Eva Ann's posthumous stepsister. This is Charles Bannon, the farmhand who murdered 6 members of the Haven family near Schaefer, North Dakota, in 1930. Months after this photograph was taken, a masked mob dragged him from jail and carried out North Dakota's last lynching. During the 1902 coal strike, child laborers marched through Philadelphia demanding education, justice, and safer lives. Their signs exposed a brutal reality. Children worked dangerous jobs instead of attending school, and many ended up in hospitals. Allied bombs turned Berlin streets into mountains of rubble, cutting water and electricity across entire neighborhoods. With bread sliced paper thin and the Red Army less than 70 kilometers away, Nazi posters still threatened death to anyone who raised a white flag. In early 20th century St. Petersburg, children commonly worked full shifts in shoe workshops alongside adults. They performed the same exhausting tasks but received far lower wages, making child labor a cheap source of profit. In April 1996, a boy played on a burned-out tank after the siege of Sarajevo, the longest siege of a capital city in modern history. For nearly 4 years, shelling and sniper fire killed more than 11,000 people, including over 1,000 children. In 1940, a Greek mother gives her son a family icon before he leaves to fight Mussolini's invading army. Greece shocked the world by driving the Italians back into Albania, forcing Hitler to invade the Balkans before attacking the Soviet Union. This photo shows members of Uruguay's Old Christians rugby team trapped inside a wrecked plane high in the Andes in 1972. After 72 days of freezing cold, starvation, and eating the dead, 16 people were rescued alive. Benito Mussolini plays the violin in Rome in 1927, performing on an instrument he had studied since childhood. He often played for private guests, using music to shape his image as a cultured and disciplined leader. These German airmen were captured after being shot down during a bombing raid on Kyiv on June 25, 1941. The photograph was taken just 3 days after Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union and turned Kyiv into a major Luftwaffe target. This 1890 photograph is often called the first known image of pizza, showing Naples baker Raphael Esposito at work. He became famous for the disputed claim that he created pizza margherita for Italy's queen using tomato, mozzarella, and basil. Brothers Michel and Edmond Navratil survived the Titanic after their father placed them in the last lifeboat and died in the sinking. Known as the Titanic Orphans, they were reunited with their mother on May 16, 1912. This behind-the-scenes photo shows the full-size mechanical shark built for Jaws in 1975. Its constant failures in saltwater forced Steven Spielberg to hide the shark for much of the film, creating even greater suspense. During Operation Barbarossa in 1941, Germany used about 600,000 horses as temperatures near -30 degrees crippled trucks and engines. Long supply lines, Soviet scorched earth tactics, and poor winter gear caused severe shortages, breakdowns, and heavy losses by early 1942. These African soldiers served in Italy's colonial police and fought during the invasion of British Somaliland in 1940. Italy captured the colony in just 17 days, but British forces retook it 7 months later. In the 1930s, this flour mill worker sealed a cotton sack printed with a cheerful rabbit design. During the Great Depression, many families reused these sacks to sew dresses, shirts, and children's clothes because store-bought fabric was too expensive. A Chechen man praised during the Battle of Grozny in January 1995. Behind him, a gas pipeline struck by shrapnel burns as Russian forces fight to capture the city. Anthony Bourdain, at his high school graduation in New Jersey in 1974, decades before becoming one of television's most fearless food storytellers. He later dropped out of college, graduated from the Culinary Institute of America, and built his career in New York kitchens. This photograph captured Castle Romeo exploding over Bikini Atoll at 6:30 in the morning on March 27, 1954. The 11-megaton blast was the third largest nuclear test in American history, and it was detonated from a barge because the previous explosion had destroyed the original test site. United States Navy men carry crosses uphill to bury fallen comrades during the Battle of Attu in May 1943. Of roughly 2,900 Japanese defenders, only 28 survived to be captured. In 1987, demolition crews in East Berlin uncovered the buried remains of a bunker beneath Hitler's former New Reich chancellery. The ruins were exposed while the communist government cleared the secretive site for new apartment blocks. NASA engineers prepared Tyros-1, America's first weather satellite, for its historic launch in 1960. During just 78 days in orbit, it sent back nearly 23,000 cloud images and proved that storms could be tracked from space. At Tapua Junction near Nablus in September 2001, young Israeli settlers waited for a bus beside graffiti reading, "No Arabs, no terror." Armed soldiers guarded them as the Second Intifada turned ordinary checkpoints into heavily protected flashpoints. In 1935, Emperor Haile Selassie placed his boot on an unexploded Italian bomb after an air raid on Dessie, Ethiopia. Beside him stood his young son, witnessing the brutal invasion that would bring bombs and chemical weapons to their country. This portrait from around 1898 shows French racer Henri Fournier with an early motorized tricycle. After starting on motorcycles and tricycles, he joined Moors in 1901 and dominated the season by winning both Paris to Bordeaux and Paris to Berlin. In 1901, Atlantic City's Loop-the-Loop sent riders through one of America's earliest vertical loops on 2 side-by-side steel tracks. Its oval loop was a safety breakthrough built to reduce the brutal forces produced by earlier circular designs. After a massive snowstorm in 1931, snowbanks towered over this streetcar in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Photographer Charles Zoller captured workers clearing the tracks by hand so public transport could move again. Arnold Schwarzenegger proudly displays his United States citizenship certificate in 1983, 15 years after arriving in America with limited English and little money. He later said becoming an American citizen was one of the proudest moments of his life. Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee married on a beach in Cancun in 1995, just 4 days after their first date. She wore a white bikini, he wore shorts, and they tattooed each other's names on their ring fingers instead of exchanging traditional wedding rings. During the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, Red Cross volunteers wore masks while making more for soldiers and civilians. The virus infected about 1/3 of the world and killed at least 50 million people. Around 1950, these men posed with rocket nose cones over their heads during the Korean War era. The bizarre helmets were real missile parts, turning a deadly symbol of modern warfare into a strangely playful photograph. In the 1960s, a Madame Tussauds artist compared dozens of glass eyes while creating a wax figure of British disc jockey Pete Murray. Each eye had to match his exact color, size, and gaze, making this unsettling trait a crucial part of the illusion. At the 1976 Montreal Olympics, Bruce Jenner won the decathlon with a world record score after 10 grueling events. He then grabbed an American flag from a spectator and carried it during his victory lap, creating one of the game's most iconic images. Crowds packed Fleetwood's waterfront in the 1960s to watch the return of steamship services to the Isle of Man. The route connected Lancashire with the island across the Irish Sea, turning the first renewed sailing into a major local event. In 1941, New York protesters argued that Hitler had not attacked the United States and asked why Americans should fight him. Months later, Pearl Harbor brought America into the war, and Germany declared war on the United States. In 1957, George the Cat lived high above Sydney as the unofficial mascot of the Harbor Bridge. He fearlessly walked the narrow steel beams while traffic rushed beneath his paws. A boy chips away at the Berlin Wall near Potsdamer Platz on November 14, 1989. Just 5 days earlier, East Germany had opened its borders, and ordinary people began tearing apart the barrier that had divided Berlin for 28 years. This photograph, reportedly taken in Zambia in 1978, shows 2 young girls carrying assault rifles during the Rhodesian Bush War. Zambia sheltered Rhodesian guerrilla forces, and repeated cross-border raids dragged civilians and even children dangerously close to the fighting. British soldiers patrolled Derry on August 15, 1969, 1 day after the Battle of the Bogside ended. Their deployment began Operation Banner, which became the longest continuous campaign in British military history and lasted 38 years. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi and his staff send off Japanese kamikaze pilots before a suicide mission in the final year of World War II. The pilots drink a ceremonial cup of sake, knowing they are not expected to return. Soviet and American soldiers raise their glasses together inside Berlin's famous Femina dance cafe. This rare celebration in Schöneberg captured the brief moment when 2 future Cold War enemies still toasted as allies. American Rangers take cover from German sniper fire during the first battles in Normandy in June 1944. They carry M1 carbines, while an abandoned German MG-42 lies in the road just feet away. In 1930, nearly 3,000 workers began blasting the Hawks Nest Tunnel through silica-rich sandstone in West Virginia. Working up to 15 hours a day without masks or proper ventilation, they inhaled deadly dust so thick that survivors said they could almost touch it. In 1939, a San Antonio woman feeds scraps into a battered steel drum, turning it into a homemade backyard incinerator. Before regular garbage collection reached many neighborhoods, families often burned household waste themselves, despite the smoke, sparks, and serious fire risk. On November 16, 1957, police entered Ed Gaines' farmhouse after finding evidence that linked him to missing store owner Bernice Worden. Inside, they discovered Worden's body and household objects made from human skin and bones, exposing crimes that shocked America. This Victorian asylum patient was photographed in a restraining garment designed to control her arms. In 19th century England, criminals, disabled people, and psychiatric patients could be confined together while paying visitors toured some institutions to stare at them for entertainment. Italian anti-aircraft fire tore this British Bristol Blenheim apart during the East African Campaign. The wreck reveals the brutal air war fought over Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somaliland between 1940 and 1941. On April 1, 1984, Marvin Gaye's father shot him during an argument inside their Los Angeles home. The legendary singer died one day before his 45th birthday, and his father later received a suspended sentence. In April 1945, paratrooper Harry Lorenzo posed near Katharinenburg, Germany, with a Thompson submachine gun across his lap. Peeking from his combat jacket was Caput, the tiny puppy he carried during the final weeks of the war in Europe. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic began in 1962 and spread to around 1,000 people, mostly school children. It lasted over 18 months, closed 14 schools, and caused no reported deaths because it was a mass psychogenic illness, not a contagious disease. On April 2, 1996, thousands marched through Minsk against a new Union treaty with Russia. The protest became the first major rally of the Minsk Spring, a wave of resistance to President Alexander Lukashenko's integration plans. This 1840 photograph shows Crawford Notch, a steep passage carved by the Saco River through New Hampshire's White Mountains. It is one of the earliest surviving American landscape photographs captured when outdoor photography was still a remarkable technical challenge. The Great Baltimore Fire of 1904 burned for more than 30 hours and destroyed over 1,500 buildings across 70 city blocks. Firefighters arrived from nearby cities, but many could not connect their hoses because American fire hydrants had no national standard. In 1968, Ivan Sutherland created the Sword of Damocles, one of the first computer-controlled head-mounted three-dimensional displays. It was so heavy that it had to be suspended from the ceiling above the user. In 1927, George R. White built this strange ornithopter with flapping wings, a chromium molybdenum steel frame, and fire-resistant celluloid fabric. Photographed on September 21st, it crashed during a test flight, but was later rebuilt and improved. This early snowmobile from around 1910 to 1915 used an aircraft-style propeller to push a lightweight sled across deep snow. Unlike modern snowmobiles, it had no powered tracks, leaving its passengers exposed beside a spinning propeller and engine. In 1912, a blind man tested the optophone, a machine that turned reflected light into musical notes. Invented by Edmond Fournier d'Albe, it allowed trained users to recognize printed letters by hearing different patterns of sound. Around 1900, Welsh strongwoman Miriam Kate Williams, known as Vulcana, shocked crowds by performing feats of strength usually reserved for men. Beyond the stage, she earned medals for bravery after stopping a runaway horse and rescuing children from a burning building. In 1922, sideshow performers Jolly Nellie, Blanche Lane, and Clarence Chesterfield Howerton were promoted as the world's largest woman and smallest man. Nellie reportedly weighed 292 kilograms, while 18-year-old Clarence stood just 71 centimeters tall and weighed only 5.9 kilograms. Lucia Zarate was a Mexican circus performer and the lightest documented adult in history, weighing just 2.1 kilograms at age 17. She reportedly stopped growing before her first birthday and became famous after appearing beside ordinary objects that made her tiny size look almost impossible. Most of the Apollo astronauts gathered in Houston in 1978 for this rare group photograph. Only 12 of these men walked on the moon, while others piloted command modules alone in lunar orbit. On May 25, 1921, Irish Republican Army fighters seized Dublin's Custom House and set it on fire, destroying centuries of British tax records. 5 fighters were killed and about 80 captured, making the spectacular attack a military disaster but a powerful symbol of Irish independence. Benito Mussolini attends a fascist party meeting in Rome in 1921, the year he first entered the Italian parliament. 1 year later, King Victor Emmanuel III made him prime minister, opening the door to a dictatorship that lasted more than 2 decades. Around 1928, Jesse James's granddaughter, Ethel Rose, posed outside her father's replica outlaw cabin cafe in California. She held her grandfather's rifles beside the boots he wore when he was shot dead in 1882. This eerie 1917 photograph claims to show 2 gas mask ghosts inside an unknown First World War trench. Their blank white faces look supernatural, but they were likely staged by soldiers using crude masks to create a haunting wartime joke. Little Boy exploded over Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, but this photograph does not show a person vaporized into the ground. The dark marks were created when bodies or objects briefly shielded surfaces from the bomb's intense heat. Belle Starr earned the name Bandit Queen by riding with outlaws and refusing the strict rules imposed on women. In 1889, she was shot from ambush, and her killer was never identified. DDT once killed mosquitoes so effectively that it helped drive malaria out of entire regions. But the chemical built up in food chains, thinned birds' eggshells, and raised health concerns, leading many countries to ban it. During Prohibition, officials destroyed seized alcohol while crowds watched. The ban lasted from 1920 to 1933, but it made bootleggers rich and flooded America with dangerous illegal liquor. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapsed just 4 months after opening in 1940, twisting violently in winds of only 42 miles per hour. Its lightweight design allowed a deadly aerodynamic flutter that engineers had failed to predict. On July 29, 1945, the destroyer Pritchett was rescuing survivors from the sunken Callahan when a kamikaze attacked. The aircraft was shot down but exploded beside the ship, tearing open its hull and killing 2 sailors. In 1957, an Air National Guard jet crashed into a front yard in Worcester, killing both crewmen instantly. Burning fuel damaged 6 nearby homes, yet no civilians were injured, and only the plane's tail remained. In 1995, 13-year-old Thad Phillips was kidnapped by Joe Clark, the Bonebreaker killer, and held captive for nearly 2 days. Clark broke both of his legs and twisted his ankles, but Thad escaped and eventually learned to walk again. Nazi guard Jenny Wanda Barkman stands beside a mountain of shoes taken from prisoners at the Stutthof concentration camp. Convicted of brutal crimes against inmates, she was publicly hanged in 1946 at the age of 24. In 1945, 2 soldiers from the 147th Infantry used a flamethrower to clear a hidden tunnel on Iwo Jima. Hundreds of Japanese troops remained underground after the Marines left, turning caves and tunnels into deadly holdouts. Between 1916 and 1931, encephalitis lethargica killed about 500,000 people and left many survivors awake but unable to move or speak. Some patients suffered violent eye spasms or Parkinson-like symptoms, yet the epidemic suddenly vanished and its cause remains unknown. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?